sermon this morning was to decide on which angle to focus this sermon on this morning. There's so many angles of leadership, and there's so many different avenues that we could go down this morning. But this morning, I would like to look at what it means to be a godly leader. This sermon is not only for the one that will be chosen for pastor next Sunday. This sermon is not gender specific. This sermon is not age specific. This sermon this morning is for all of us. All of us are leaders at one time or another. All of us influence somebody at some time. We might not even know or find out when that is, but all of us do. So this sermon this morning, if you hear the word leadership, this sermon is for me and it's for you, for all of us. I would like to, in a very simple way, illustrate 4 types of leadership. This is not original with me, but it was very impactful for me. The one type of leadership is this. You have the leader at the top, and you have all the others down at the bottom. In between here, you have several layers. You might have a lead pastor, a deacon, an elder, the people. You might have an owner or a CEO, managers, supervisors, line workers. The leader is on an island by himself at the top. He is very disconnected with the people because of the layers in between. He is indirectly leading. It's a lonely spot to be. That's one style. Another style is you have the leader at the bottom. The people are here. You again have multiple layers. The leader is actually serving. The one at the bottom is serving and he's supporting. However, he's carrying the whole weight. And it can be defeating and it can be crushing. He's not delegating because he doesn't trust. He has no spare time because he's doing everything. He's doing all the weddings, he's doing all the baptisms, he's doing all the preaching, or he's doing all the hiring, he's doing all the firing, he's doing everything. It might be a father in the home where he's doing everything. The third style of leadership is this style here, to where the leader is here and his followers are here, and he's pushing with power. He's pushing. Have you ever tried to chase a flock of sheep? It doesn't work. It doesn't. Sheep are meant to be led. This leader is using power instead of influence. He's pushing. He has a plan. He has a well laid out plan, and some people get it. But some people are pushing back. He's pushing with power. And then you have this style of leadership, where the people are here, the leader is here, and the leader is facing that way. And that leader is following someone else, which is his authority. He's being led. He is leading, and the people are being led, and they're following. He's in his rightful position, facing the right way. Now, at times, he needs to look back and make sure he's not creating too much distance between him and the followers. Leadership is not a horizontal or a vertical pattern. Leadership is a horizontal pattern. Way too often, I get in my mind that leadership is vertical. Leadership is horizontal, where you have a leader and you have followers. Now, which style of leadership was Jesus? He wasn't on an island by himself. He didn't do all the work. He didn't push and shove. But he led because he was being led. He was accountable to his Father. He was in his rightful place. Jesus, the ultimate example of a godly leader. Far more things than can be held in a book or an article could be said about Jesus as the ultimate leader. There are certain attributes and principles that he demonstrated perfectly. I'd like to summarize it into two principles that we'd like to flesh out this morning. And those two principles were humility and authenticity. Humility, he was humble. He knew who he was. He knew his rightful place. And authenticity, he was just who he was. There was no secrets. He was not afraid of close relationships, of people finding out who the actual Jesus was. He was who he was. Turn your Bibles to Matthew 20, and we'd like to read verses 20 through 28. Matthew chapter 20, begin reading in verse 20, and like to read through 28. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him, talking about Jesus, with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in the kingdom." Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant. But it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them." Top down. Lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Three things here that I'd like to point out about these last two verses. Number one, Jesus knew his identity. He calls himself the Son of Man. He knew who he was. He knew that he was God in the form of man. He was God in the form of a human being. Number two, he knew his purpose. He knew his purpose. Why he was here on earth. He says to serve. To serve and to teach others the servanthood model, because he wasn't going to be on earth forevermore in a human body. He knew his identity, who he was. He knew his purpose, what he was here for, and he knew his mission, what he was here to accomplish. And that was to, at the end of his life here on earth, to literally give himself as a sacrifice. So how did Jesus accomplish all of this in everyday living? First of all, Jesus operated from a base of principles rather than making up the rules as he went. With who Jesus was, he could have had a dynamic kingdom established on this earth. With the power that he could have attained, he could have done that. Jesus substituted power for relationships. That is an important point in a godly leader, to substitute power for relationships. Leaders who hold on to power at the expense of relationships get into this crazy cycle of then having to do almost anything to keep perpetuating that power. And perpetuating, I mean to keep it ongoing. And then they lose their principles, they lose their integrity, they lose everything at the expense of keeping on ruling from a powerful standpoint versus a relationship standpoint. Another thing we see in the life of Jesus was that he could have tapped into his all-knowing brilliance because he was God, but that would have separated himself from the ordinary people. Jesus used the concept of do what I do rather than do what I say. Now, I realize that all of us, the intent is to do what we say. But people will go by actions over words. I am told that in communication, 7% of what people hear are the words. The other 93% is made up in actions, in voice tone, in body language, everything else that we give off. It does us well to remember that. He walked and he worked with those he served. He was not a long-distance leader. He was with the people he led. He was not afraid of close friendships. I've had people come into my life that I must say I held at bay for some time before I really got to know them. And part of it was probably because I didn't want them to get to learn me very well, learn to know me very well. And why was that? Because I was afraid they'd discover some ugly things and that it might change their perspective of who they think I am. Jesus wasn't afraid of close relationships. He actually left us the model of in effective leadership, there needs to be close-knit relationships. Jesus had himself and the Father, and then he had the three, Peter, James, and John, and then he had the 12, and then there was the 72, and it goes on, ripple effect. But it started with him being vulnerable and allowing close relationships. So now we've talked about the principles that Jesus lived by. How can we flesh those out for ourselves? The first principle I'd like to talk about this morning that Jesus evidenced well is the principle of understanding ourselves. Understanding ourselves. It was approximately, it was back in 2008. At the end of 2008, Mernita and I had just moved our family to Virginia to serve at Mountain View Nursing Home. And in the fall of 2008, the decision was made that we would be sent over to Life Ministries in Pennsylvania, and we would be enrolled in their Core 1 training. And what we knew about this Core 1 training is it's 9 days, it's 3 different weekends, 3 days per weekend, and everybody said, it's good, but it's not fun. Thank you. Yeah. That you have something to look forward to, right? So we went with the intent of, well, they're sending us over there. We're kind of youth pastor discipleship leaders at Mountain View, and we're really going to learn how to work with people and how to counsel people. After those 9 days of Core 1 training at Life Ministries, we decided that we found out a lot more about ourselves than we did about helping others. The first session there, this was on a Thursday. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 3 different weekends. The first session there, you get thrown in with a group of people that you have no idea who are. It's a cell group, and then you also have like group sessions like this here. And that first weekend, I was handed the task of writing my life story. And I started writing, and I think I filled 5 8.5 by 11 legal size pages of my story, and then my instructor came back with, I think, 4 or 5 questions, and I filled another 3 pages answering those questions. And that was the first weekend. How many of you want to go take this training? That was the first weekend. Every weekend, we had to write more about our life story. I really got to know who I really was. And there was some parts that were very uncomfortable to get into and to reopen and to visit. But my point is this: before we can help or lead others, we need to know ourselves and to know how to lead ourselves. So how do we do that? How many of you have heard the term crucible moment? Some of you have. I asked Marnita this morning if she's heard the term crucible moment or knows what that is, and she goes, I guess when you crucify something. Well, yes, in part that's right. So a crucible moment is a moment that sometime in your life, a moment that you went through that was possibly very painful, and it could have taken you one of 2 ways. It's a moment or an experience that can either really strengthen your faith in God and confidence in yourself, or the other thing it can do is totally shatter your self-confidence and totally take you the opposite, the not so good way. If I think back over my life, I'm just going to have, I guess, a time of a little bit of vulnerability here. If I think back over my life, there's 4 crucible moments that really jump out at me in my 48 years of life. And I'm not going to go into detail, but the first was when I was 16 years old. Because of my skillful driving, I lost my license and I had to bike to work. I was 16 and I got 2 speeding tickets in about a month and a half's time. And I lost my license for 3 months. And my dad told me, there's a bike shop just down the road, let's go buy a new bike. So I biked to work for 3 months. I can still feel that rain pounding down as I biked up the Walnut Creek Hill up to Schrock's Woodcrafts at that time. I was working there. It taught me a lesson that if you disobey the law, there's consequences. My second crucible moment was while I was working at Schrock's. I was on the installation crew. And I was probably 18, 19 years old maybe. And I thought I was trying my best, but obviously I wasn't accomplishing it, because the crew leader that I was working with came into the scheduler one morning and said, we just can't put up with Shawn anymore. He's just not getting it. He's making mistakes. He's not catching on. That was a difficult moment. Fortunately, my Uncle Alfred, B.J. Mark's dad, took me under his wing and had patience with me and taught me. And about a year later, the guy that had come in and said they don't want me on their crew came back in and requested that I go along to run trim. That was a crucible moment. I had to lay down my pride and be willing to be taught. My third crucible moment was, as some of you know and some of you might not know that don't know me well, was when my first wife passed away because of cancer. And God taught me a lot of things through that experience you're not in control. You're not in control of your destiny. There's forks in the road. I remember one evening specifically, I went on a drive, and I had to make the choice that evening. Do I go left or do I go right with my life? That was a crucible moment. God taught me that he's in control. And then the fourth crucible moment was back on January 21st, 2018, when I was ordained as a pastor. And I'll tell you, that was not in my plans. But here I am today. Why do I say, or why do I share these moments? All of us have had crucible moments to where we have a choice of allowing it to define us one way or another. And I am firmly convinced that everything that God brings into our life is preparation for the next thing. But it's up to us how we choose to handle those situations. And it's up to us if we allow those situations to mold us and form us to what God has for us sometime later in the future. David had a crucible moment before he killed Goliath. It was the lion and the bear. When he walked into Saul's office and told Saul that, I can go kill that giant, what did he say? I've already killed the bear and the lion. If he would have used those experiences the opposite way, his response would have been, I'm not touching that giant. I already had to fight with a bear and a lion. I'm not doing that again. I got hurt. I got scratched up. Might have broken an arm. We don't know. But he used that moment as a stepping stone for the next. What is your crucible moment this morning, and how are you addressing that moment for the good of what God has in store for you? Is there anybody that would feel led to share a crucible moment? A godly leader seizes the opportunity to grow and learn from the experiences that God brings. Godly leaders embrace their strengths and recognize their weaknesses. I have not found any weaknesses in Jesus' leadership style. He was God in human form. We are not God. If we refuse to recognize our weaknesses, trust me, others can tell you. Others can tell you. So, some of you I know well. Some of you know me fairly well. Some of you don't know me well. There's probably some people in here that might not be able to tell me my weaknesses. I work with Mike and Conrad. I'm sure they could tell me some weaknesses that I have. If they can't tell you, I'm sure my family, they're sitting back there, they'd be ready to tell you some of my weaknesses. They know my weaknesses. A godly leader embraces his strengths with humility and acknowledges and recognizes his weaknesses. None of us is good enough to do everything. That's why we have team. That's why we have church family. None of us is as smart as all of us. Self-awareness in getting to understand ourselves. Self-awareness. We have external self-awareness and we have internal self-awareness. External self-awareness, what do I mean by this? It's understanding how others see me helps me develop behaviors in order to make people feel comfortable when I'm around them. It is extremely important that the people that somebody is leading, that they're comfortable in the presence of their leader. What are examples of this? Being self-aware enough to not make I'll call them tone-deaf comments. Being self-aware enough to not intentionally irritate someone. Just knowing how people view you. Not in order to lift you up or to put you down, but just being aware. Ask people around you, how am I viewed? How do I come across? Do I come across negative? Do I come across positive? I'm going to be sharing some very practical things this morning. Being external self-aware. So at work, we all know who Mike is. We call him Big Mike. 6'7" or 6'8". I used to do quite a bit of hiring at work, and the steps of our hiring process would be I'd have an interview with the person, and then if they're hiring for a position in furniture, I'd take them out to Mike, and with Mike being, sorry Mike, I'm picking on you this morning, with Mike being furniture production manager, he would take the prospective employee out and show them around to show them what their duties would be. So I hired, or we hired a lot of young Amish ladies, and they walk into my office and they might be 5'2", 5'3" tall, and I know that Mike is tall, and if they've never met Mike, I knew that this could be fairly intimidating. I knew that a 5-foot lady looking up and seeing this man step into his doorway that close to hitting the top of the doorway can be very intimidating. So I just tell him, I'm going to take you out to Mike. Now he's 6'7". He's tall, but he's a really nice guy. Just to put their nerves at rest when we come out there, just to make sure that Mike can be comfortable with them and they can be comfortable with Mike in making a connection. Just be self-aware. Self-aware of how you come across to people. Internal self-awareness. Put a check valve on your thoughts, on your actions. Thoughts lead to actions. On your intentions. On your intentions. Look for patterns. Jesus was accountable to his Father and to his disciples. Look for patterns. The quality of leader, and this is not a quote original with me. This is from Dan Oalabi. He is just a local leadership teacher. The quality of a leader is reflected in the standards that leaders set for themselves. Authority derived from a position or title does not make one a leader. Rather, their influence is created when others see and respect the purpose and discipline of their daily life. Folks, this morning, leadership, effective leadership, godly leadership is not rocket science. It is being disciplined in our personal lives in order to be disciplined when other things arise. Understanding ourselves. The next principle is, after we learn to understand ourselves, the principle of understanding others. Understanding others. Jesus was a good listener. If there was ever a man that should have been afforded all the speaking time, it should have been Jesus. But he listened. Jesus was a good listener. There's two ways to listen. There's listening to understand, and then there's listening to reply. And unfortunately, I have to admit that way too often I am listening, and while the person I'm speaking to or is speaking to me is finishing up, I'm generating my reply. And I might totally miss what he's trying to tell me. Jesus listened to understand. He listened without being condescending. The woman at the well, if Jesus wouldn't have listened to her story, although he already knew that story, the outcome would have been drastically different. The woman that the men came that was in adultery, Jesus listened. He wasn't condescending. He said, "Lady, go and sin no more." He had others' best interest in mind, even if it meant rebuking and reproving someone. Peter. There was numerous times when Jesus had to rebuke Peter. John 18, verses 10 and 11. This is when Judas brought the soldiers to arrest Jesus. Then Simon Peter, having his sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back in your sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Jesus had a relationship with Peter to the point where rebuking was possible. Relationships in leadership are like a bank account. We all know what happens if we write out a check and there's no money in the bank. It's no good. There's consequences. Relationships are like a bank account in this way. Sometimes there's a withdrawal that needs to be made. If a crisis arises, there's rebuke to be given. There's reproof to be given. And if there's no relationship and there's no money in the bank, it's not going to go well. But if there's a balance in the account, and that account has been built up with relationships, positive relationship, then the reproving will be much more effective. Luke then tells us that Jesus immediately just healed the guy's ear again. Got Peter off the hook, I guess. Leading with power versus influence. Like I mentioned before, Jesus could have very easily power-driven his leadership with the genetics that he had. But he chose to use influence. Power is the ability to get others to do your will against their will based on the position you have over them. Influence, on the other hand, is the ability to get people to do your will because of who you are and the relationships you have with them. And when I say who you are, it's because of your track record that you've shown to them, your daily disciplines, the way you've led. They want to follow your influence. The next principle that I'd like to touch on is the principle of sacrifice. Selflessness. Jesus put himself and his own needs to the side in order to serve others. This morning I'd like to brag a little bit on the mothers here this morning. There's probably not a more selfless person in this room than moms. Would you all agree with that? Let's give our moms a hand. So, we all know that if mom has cooked a meal and she all of a sudden realizes that the boys are really hungry and the food might run a little bit tight, who goes last? Mom. We all know that if Johnny comes running in through the door and has a splinter in his finger, who's he going to run to? Mom, not dad. He's going to run to mom. Mom's going to lay down whatever she's doing and help him. We all know that moms spend a lot of time at home making sure everything's in order. And if there's time, then they'll do the things that they really want to do for a little bit of relief from their normal duties. What's fascinating to me is in most homes, in the years from infant to teenage, who is the biggest influencer? Mom. Why? There's relationship, there's time spent, there's sacrifice. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I know us dads have our jobs to do, but I know that us dads can at times do better in sacrificing our time for those that we're leading at the time, even if it's our own family. Jesus was very sacrificial. giving up our own agenda, giving up our own ideas for the sake of finding a better solution from those around us. This quote comes from Jim Smoker, he's the president of Keim Lumber. In a time of crisis, listen. In a time of crisis, listen. Us male figures, we enjoy conquering things. We enjoy fixing things. More than once, my wife has told me, if she goes off to me about something, she's told me, Shawn, just listen to me. I don't need it fixed. Just listen. We like to fix things. If there's a time of crisis, we like to be the knight in shining armor riding in and fixing the problem. But so often we miss things by acting too fast. Now, I'm not promoting procrastination. That's not what I'm promoting. But what I am promoting is listen to those you're leading. Listen to those around you. They are all there for your best interests. In a time of crisis, listen. Sacrificing our own ideas for the ideas of those around us. The next principle that I'd like to briefly touch on is the principle of responsibility. And I'd like to quickly do an object lesson to illustrate this principle. And I'd like to see a raise of hands for all the young boys that are in first or second grade. Please raise your hands. We have 2 up here. Any other first or second graders? We have 2. Okay. Oh boy, we have 4 and I only need 3 people. Could I have 3 volunteers? 1, 2, and Joash, are you raising your hand? Joash, come on up here. Sorry, Raylan. I can only use 3 people. Is that okay? Okay. If I could have Kim, can you bring me 1 chair? Or actually, bring 1 chair. So what I need you guys to do is, let's see how this is going to work here. Yeah. What I need you guys to do is, Kim, I want you to set the chair about right here. And I need you guys, thank you for coming up here and helping me. I need you to stand here. I need you to stand back to back here. And I need you to stand right here. Yeah, that's good. Now I'm going to tie you guys together. Oh boy, is this going to reach? Maybe you'll have to put your hands out of your pockets. Boy, you guys are brave. I can get this belt to work. Okay. You guys all tied together? You might want to put your hands out. You're going to need your arms. Okay? Okay. Now, I've got 3 bags of Skittles. They're the good ones. They're the sour ones. You're going to hold that. And you're going to hold that. And I'm going to put 1 there. Now, the object is for you guys to get all the Skittles as fast as you can. How's that? Who's the strongest? You are, okay. So we see this bag's going to get taken first, right? Okay, I'm going to time you guys. And when I say go, you guys try as hard as you can to get the Skittles, okay? Are you ready? On your mark, get set, go. Okay. We'll hold it right there. So can you guys get up again? Okay. Now give me the Skittles again. Now I want to give you a tip. Come on back here. We're going to do this again, okay? Now when I... Let's go in the middle again. All right, now let's try it again. See if we can get it faster yet, okay? On your mark, get set, go.
Can you keep these?
Yeah, you can keep those. If I can get you guys loose. You guys might have to stay this way. There we go. All right, you can go back to your parents. So the object of the lesson is what? Work together. So many times, we as leaders are not in step with the group we're trying to lead. And we're pulling all different directions. What happened? Yeah, they got at least 2 of the prizes, but they were stumbling over each other. They were fighting each other. They were miserable being tied together. But when we got them to walk in sync and to work together as one team, it was a lot less chaotic. Jesus knew how to involve his disciples. In John 17, Jesus prayed for 3 types of protection over his disciples: to keep them from separation and discord, to keep them from physical harm until their appointed time, and for spiritual protection against Satan. A godly leader prays for his flock. A godly leader prays for protection for his group. A godly leader prays for protection against any harm. Working as a team is far more powerful and efficient than trying to be a one-man show. Trying to be the guy on top or the guy on the bottom. Jesus trusted his followers enough to share his work with them. Trust goes both ways. I just got done a few months ago, I guess it was, reading a book by Jeff Evans. How many of you know who Jeff Evans is? He's a mountain climber that climbed Mount Everest, and he led a blind guy to the top of Mount Everest. And we had the opportunity of having him out at work as a guest speaker. And he wrote a book entitled Climbing Through Storms. And one point that he made in that book that really, really hit me was, so he was working with this blind guy named Eric. And we all know that the blind guy obviously needed to trust Jeff as he told him the different steps. And they were crossing crevices 60 feet wide across ice glaciers. And they were walking on a ladder laid flat. This is leading a blind guy. But the point he made was, not only did Jeff need to trust him, but he needed to trust Jeff. Or Eric. Eric was a blind guy. Not only did Eric need to trust Jeff, but Jeff said, I needed to trust the blind guy, that he would do exactly what I tell him. Trust goes both ways. Where there is a breach in trust, it won't work. It won't work. Unfortunately, what can take years to build can be erased in a matter of moments. And respect can be quickly, at times, rebuilt, but trust takes a long time to rebuild. Jesus trusted his followers enough to share his work with them. Delegation. Like I mentioned before, none of us is good enough to do everything. We need to trust people with duties. They don't all have to be done like I do them. We all have a specific goal to reach, but they can be done different ways. We need to trust. One of the most important parts of leadership is developing our successors. What was Jesus' mission on earth? Yes, he was here to give himself as a sacrifice, and he was here to teach and heal people. But one of his biggest missions, or most important missions on earth, was to develop his disciples to do greater things after he is no longer here. One of the biggest testaments of a man's character is training in his replacement. Training in his replacement. The tendency can be like, I know this guy will take my place, but I kind of hope he doesn't do as good of a job as I did. Or he might. Training our successors is a huge part of leadership. Developing our successors. Jesus perfectly demonstrated the principle of multiplication, delegation. Jesus also believed and saw potential in the people that he led. A lot of people saw Peter as a fisherman. Jesus saw him as a powerful, courageous, religious leader that eventually impacted most of mankind through the Gospels and the epistles. The last principle is the principle of accountability. So we have the principle of understanding ourselves, the principle of understanding others, the principle of sacrifice, the principle of responsibility, getting others involved, and now the principle of accountability. Jesus was accountable to the Father. John 8:28 through 29. So Jesus said to them, "When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as my Father taught me. And he who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him." Always do the things that are pleasing to the Father. A godly leader is not only accountable to God, but he's accountable to the people he leads. All of us answer to someone. I encourage and challenge all of us to view accountability this morning as a safety net and not as a threat to our authority. Accountability is a safety net. All of us have blind spots. Accountability as a safety net rather than a threat to our authority. Our team is a mirror of us. How do you want your team to look? How do you want your team to function? Look in the mirror. A team is a mirror of their leader. We often say practice what you preach, but I'm going to flip that around this morning and say preach what you practice. It'll be a lot more effective. All of us, at one time or another, have to lead a group to someplace where we might not have been, but together as a collaborative effort, we want to reach that goal. But there's also a tendency at times to preach something and then we try to practice it. And I'm here to say this morning, I believe it's far more effective to practice or to preach what we practice, to preach what we've been through, to preach what God has already shown us. In conclusion, understanding ourselves, be confident and embrace the person God created you to be. Understanding others, build influence by listening to understand others at a deep level. The principle of sacrifice, serve others by putting their needs first. The principle of responsibility, teamwork, get others involved, develop successors for the future. And then the principle of accountability, people perform to standards set by their leaders. I'd like to wrap up this morning by reading a portion in John when Judas came with his band of thieves or soldiers to arrest Jesus. And just take note of what happened and the powerful influence that Jesus had even to those that weren't in his circle. John 18, verses 1 through 8. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom seek ye?" He was all-knowing, but he asked the question, "Whom seek ye?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," now this is how powerful he was. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," it says they drew back and fell to the ground. They just fell over. Again he said, "Whom seek ye?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth. I told you that I am he. So if ye seek me, let these men go." And then I'll jump to verses 12 and 14. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. This morning, Jesus wasn't only a powerful influence to his inner circle, to the disciples, but he was influential even to the enemy. And at the end, he truly demonstrated the principle of sacrifice, and he gave up his life because of his love for his followers. This morning, where am I in the journey of a godly leader? Where are you in whatever state of leadership you're in? Is it here at church? Is it at home? Is it at work? Is it at school? Is it among your peers? Where are you on the journey of godly leadership? Jesus is the ultimate and perfect example for us. Let's pray. God, thank you for giving us an example of leadership through your Son, Jesus. And Lord, this morning I pray that you might take the words that have been spoken and that you might be glorified and that you might grant the increase. Lord, we commit this day into your hands. I pray this on your name. Amen. Brother Paul.
We have been richly fed here this morning, and there are many things that could be said and added, but that's unnecessary.